She was held up like a regular woman, but when she called WWE, the city turned into an arena. Subscribe and write in the comments where you're watching from. The narrow two-lane highway stretched endlessly in both directions, bordered by flat fields, scorched from heat and silence. It was the kind of road that didn't lead anywhere important, just one of many that threaded through forgotten corners of Louisiana, where the grass grew higher than ambition and time slowed to a crawl. Dust trailed behind the black SUV as it moved steadily through the heart of nothing. Its windows tinted against the relentless afternoon sun. Behind the wheel, Ronda Rousey drove with the focus of someone who had spent years in motion. There was something common about the rhythm of empty roads and low static from the radio. She didn't need music. She didn't need company. She just needed to get to the next point on her calendar, where a group of military veterans waited for her in a quiet hall near Shreveport. It wasn't a public event. No fans, no lights, no WWE banners. Just people like her, bruised by life but still standing. Her attire was simple. Black hoodie, olive cargo pants, scuffed trainers, no makeup, no earrings, no media face. She had left the high-profile version of herself behind for the weekend. This was the Ronda who slept in trucks during training camps, who sharpened her fists in silence, who walked into octagons with a dead stare and walked out before her opponent even realized they'd lost. But today she wasn't fighting. She was remembering. She reached for her water bottle on the passenger seat, her fingers brushing the burner phone next to it. A secure line given to her by WWE's legal division after the last PR ambush had nearly caught her unprepared. One button on that phone connected her directly to the executive suite in Stamford. She had never used it, not once. She hoped she never would. As she passed a hand-painted sign that read Mosswood Pop 2, 41, she sighed. The gas gauge had been blinking for a while, and she didn't want to risk the long stretch between towns. She needed to make a call, too. A quick check-in with the production team to confirm her location and timing. The shoot with the veterans was happening off the radar, and the last thing they needed was paparazzi turning it into spectacle. Her phone was already down to one bar. Then she saw it. An old gas station just off the bend. Kelly's Fuel and Food. The sun had scorched the red and white sign until it faded to rust and bone. The pumps looked prehistoric, and the small store beside them leaned slightly to the left like it had given up standing tall. But it was open, and that was enough. Ronda pulled into the lot, parking her SUV on the far edge, away from the storefront. A few locals lingered near the entrance, leaning on old trucks, sharing drinks, exchanging the same 3 stories they told every day. No one looked up when she stepped out. Not yet. She closed the door gently and walked toward the side of the building where the reception was clearer. The burner phone was already in her hand. She tapped the number for production and raised it to her ear, turning her back to the store. Her voice dropped into the calm, commanding cadence she used when things mattered. Rousey verifying, I'm on site. Reception's weak. Give me 2 minutes. On the other end, a producer's voice crackled through. He began listing off changes to the schedule, security protocols, and a possible backup location. Ronda listened, nodding slightly, her eyes scanning the lot without moving her head. Old instincts. She had learned long ago that trouble didn't always bark first. Inside the store, Paula Wiggins watched from behind the scratched counter, her arms folded over her chest. 57 years old, and still living in the same town her parents died in. She liked order. She liked knowing who was who. And she didn't like the look of the woman outside. Tall, solid, confident. Too confident, and talking on a phone like she owned the place. Paula leaned slightly to the left and squinted through the grime-coated window. The woman wasn't wearing a uniform. Didn't have a badge. Didn't look like she belonged. Her hands moved as she spoke. Precise gestures. Military, maybe. Paula didn't know. She didn't care. All she saw was trouble. And trouble, she had always believed, came in certain shapes and colors. Without a word to the 2 old men drinking coffee at the corner table, Paula reached under the counter and picked up the landline phone. She dialed a number she knew better than her own. The Mosswood Police Department. Yeah, it's Paula, she said quietly, eyes still locked on the figure outside. We got someone real suspicious out here by the pumps. Real twitchy. Could be on something. Might want to send someone. She hung up before they asked for details. 5 blocks away, Officers Garrett and Brinson were parked under a dying oak tree, half asleep in the thick air. When the dispatch came through, Garrett sighed and adjusted his belt. Let's see what kind of circus this is. They pulled into Kelly's lot 7 minutes later, tires crunching on gravel. Ronda saw the lights in her periphery and turned her head slightly. Not alarmed, just calculating. She ended her call, slid the phone into her back pocket, and stood still, hands relaxed by her sides. The officers approached fast. Garrett was built like a fridge and twice as subtle. Brinson trailed behind, clipboard in hand, trying to look official. Garrett barked first. License and registration. Ronda tilted her head. Good afternoon. Is there a problem? Don't answer questions with questions. ID now. She kept her movement slow, controlled. Her wallet came from her back pocket, her military ID and WWE credentials tucked inside. She offered them forward. I'm Ronda Rousey. I'm traveling through. Here's my identification. Garrett didn't even look down. He snatched the ID, glanced for a second, then scoffed. This ain't real. You're a wrestler. What's next? You a cop too? Maybe a CIA assassin. Brinson chuckled nervously. Ronda didn't flinch. That's a valid ID. I'm on official business. Garrett shook his head and dropped the wallet on the hood of her car like it was trash. You know what? I think you're high or you're one of them scammers. Before she could reply, he grabbed her wrist. Turn around. Sir, that's unnecessary. You resisting? I'm not. Brinson moved behind her. Hands pushed her against the SUV. The metal was hot through her shirt. The cuffs clamped tight, biting into her skin. The phone in her pocket fell to the ground. One button had been pressed before it dropped. The call connected. Back in Stamford, a red light blinked on a secured panel. An assistant paused, frowned, picked up the line. The voice was garbled, the audio laced with movement and distant shouting. Then came the unmistakable sound of metal cuffs snapping. The assistant stood up slowly and walked into a conference room where Vince McMahon was in mid-discussion with legal. He held out the phone. You need to hear this. Vince listened. Then he stood. The temperature in the room changed instantly. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't blink. Mobilize everyone. Outside the gas station, Ronda was forced to sit on the burning curb, her wrist cuffed behind her back, sweat dripping down her temple. Garrett stood over her, smug. What's your real name? She stared straight ahead. You got my ID? You think we're stupid? No, I think you're dangerous. People had gathered now, locals, teenagers, a man with a mechanic's shirt, a woman with a stroller. Some were filming, some just watched. Inside the store, Paula smiled. Across the country, black SUVs were already rolling out of the WWE compound. Flights were being booked, contracts pulled, cameras loaded. The most powerful entertainment machine in the world had been activated. And Mosswood had no idea what was coming. The headquarters of World Wrestling Entertainment in Stamford, Connecticut, was not built for quiet. Even in the early hours of the morning or the waning light of evening, the place hummed with production edits, contract reviews, marketing strategy, and the calculated chaos of managing the world's most relentless entertainment machine. But when the red indicator light on the private line blinked, a line reserved for only 3 individuals in the entire organization, everything inside the top floor executive wing came to a halt. The assistant on duty, a former field producer with nerves of steel and eyes that read headlines before they happened, saw the signal and froze for only a heartbeat before reaching for the receiver. She expected a test, maybe a false ping. What she got instead was audio so jarring it made her blood run cold. Scuffling sounds, a woman's voice stating identification, then metal clinking violently, shouts, and a thud. Her fingers moved automatically. She rose, crossed the hallway, and knocked once before entering the boardroom where Vince McMahon stood at the head of a sleek glass table surrounded by legal counsel and brand executives. He was mid-sentence discussing a pending media deal when she stepped in and held up the phone like a detonator. She used the line, the assistant said. That was all it took. Vince's face didn't change. He held out his hand, took the phone, and listened. For 10 full seconds, the room went dead silent. Then he placed the phone gently on the table, looked to the head of security, and said, Code red, mobilize everything. The legal team straightened in their seats. Someone whispered, Who? And someone else already knew. The head of digital media was out the door in seconds. The VP of Talent Relations was calling every major star in the Northeast Quadrant. Trucks were being loaded, flight plans updated, NDA overrides authorized, cameras, lighting rigs, security protocols. Everything that was ever used to build the spectacle of WrestleMania was now being redirected for something no one had trained for. Ronda Rousey had made the call, and WWE was going to war. In the talent wing, the emergency roster call went out within minutes. Bianca Belair was on a treadmill in Orlando when her phone buzzed. One look and she stepped off without breaking stride, grabbed her travel bag, and headed for the airport. Seth Rollins got the same call in New York and didn't even ask questions. He just said, "Send the coordinates." Triple H was already en route to Connecticut for a meeting when his driver made a sudden U-turn and rerouted to a private hangar. Brock Lesnar, elusive and rarely reachable, picked up on the second ring and responded with a two-word text. "I'm in." John Cena, filming in Vancouver, had to bow out temporarily, but his PR team sent a formal statement of support within the hour. In every locker room, every production studio, and every executive suite, one phrase rippled like a low tremor. "She called." Back at headquarters, Vince stood in the main operations room, watching a map of the United States with real-time tracking pins. The location of the incident, Mosswood, Louisiana, was a blinking red dot on the screen. Someone was already digging into the town's police department history, pulling prior complaints, disciplinary records, lawsuits. 3 of the names were already familiar. Patterns were forming. The internet had already picked up on the video. It had been posted anonymously less than 30 minutes after the arrest. Grainy footage, shaky hands, poor lighting, but the voice was unmistakable. "I'm Ronda Rousey." And then the cuffs. The video had 1 million views before legal could even draft a statement. Vince didn't blink as he watched it. He turned to the VP of Communications. "No press release?" "Not yet. We go live." A low murmur of shock passed through the room. "Sir, you want to broadcast everything?" Vince said. "From the moment we arrive, this doesn't get buried. This becomes a reckoning." The decision was made. Trucks rolled out of Stamford within the hour. Satellite uplinks, mobile command centers, make-up trailers, backup generators, wireless broadcast units. A live event infrastructure was being constructed en route. Planes departed from 5 different cities carrying some of the biggest names in professional wrestling. Each one briefed with a single sentence. "Ronda's been arrested. She needs us." In a private jet reserved for executive deployment, Vince McMahon sat in silence, reviewing the incident footage again and again. Every time he watched, something colder formed behind his eyes. He had built an empire on theatrics, but there was nothing staged about what he saw. The way she stood there offering ID, the way they laughed, the way they shoved her, that wasn't performance. That was humiliation. And Vince had never tolerated humiliation. Not of himself. And not of his own. He looked across the cabin to the WWE legal director, who was compiling federal statutes on false arrest, assault, civil rights, violations, and media liability. "Anything they've ever done wrong," Vince said. "I want it in a file by the time we land." "Yes, sir." In the back of the jet, Bianca Belair braided her hair tighter, her mouth set in a straight line. Seth Rollins reviewed the footage again, lips pursed. Riddle leaned back in his seat, unusually silent. There was no posturing, no hype, no smiles. Not now. They weren't flying into a storyline. They were flying into a real fight. And Ronda was one of theirs. On the ground in a New Jersey logistics hub, shipping containers were being marked Mosswood and loaded with staging materials. LED screens, entrance tunnels, speaker arrays. A wrestling event was being born, not for entertainment, but for justice. The creative team wasn't writing a script. They were building a response. Back in Stamford, the digital content team launched a controlled leak, a single black image on social media. White letters, bold, stark. "She called, we're coming." The post trended worldwide in under 20 minutes. Commentators speculated, fans argued, conspiracy theorists exploded. But by the time the WWE jet crossed into Louisiana airspace, no one was joking anymore. Cable news had picked up the arrest. Civil rights attorneys were tweeting about misuse of force. Public figures were calling for suspensions. And still the local authorities in Mosswood had no idea that their world was about to shift. Inside the plane, Vince stood and straightened his tie. He looked around at the seated superstars. "They don't get to bury this," he said. "Not this time." The plane began its descent. Below them, the town of Mosswood blinked in the fading daylight, unaware of the convoy speeding toward it on the ground and the force descending from the sky above. The machine was awake now, and nothing could stop it. The air in Mosswood shifted long before the residents understood why. The sky was the same soft yellow-gray it always was near dusk. The heat heavy like a wet blanket. Cicadas rasping from the trees like mechanical clocks, ticking out the end of another unremarkable day. But there was tension in the air, an invisible pulse that hummed beneath the quiet. At Kelly's Fuel and Food, Paula Wiggins stood behind the counter, nervously chewing the inside of her lip. The smug confidence from earlier had thinned, replaced by something colder. She had seen too much movement in town, too many unfamiliar cars, too many people asking questions. Ronda Rousey was no longer sitting on the curb. The police had taken her into the station an hour earlier, cuffed and silent, her face unreadable. She hadn't resisted, hadn't begged, hadn't even spoken, except to insist again evenly and calmly that her identification was real, that she was who she claimed to be. Her voice had not cracked. Not once. But it was the silence of the town around her that stung. Not one person had intervened. Not one had said, "I know who that is." She could have been anybody or nobody. And in Mosswood that meant she was trouble. Now though, the landscape was changing. It began with sound. Low at first, almost imperceptible, a kind of synchronized vibration that came not from nature, but from movement. A convoy, tires on highway, rubber on pavement. Then came the distant hum of aircraft, not high commercial jets, but low flyers, coordinated precision flight. At the town's north entrance, just past the faded welcome sign, a fleet of black SUVs emerged from the horizon like phantoms. Not police, not government. Sleek, tinted, armored. They were followed by production trucks, sound vans, broadcast rigs. No sirens, no warnings, just steady, deliberate arrival. People stepped out onto porches. Phones were raised, videos started recording. This wasn't a wedding caravan or a parade. This was something different. Calculated, expensive, deliberate. At the head of the formation, the lead SUV pulled onto Main Street and stopped directly in front of the Mosswood Police Department. The building itself was modest. Brown brick, flat roof, flagpole in need of repainting. 2 squad cars parked out front, the lot half full. Inside, Officers Garrett and Brinson sat with increasingly sour expressions, the weight of national attention pressing harder by the second. The video had gone viral. They had seen it, heard it, read the headlines. They knew who Ronda was now, and they knew what was coming. The passenger door, the lead SUV, opened slowly. Vince McMahon stepped out. No theme music, no pyrotechnics, no spotlight, just the raw presence of someone who'd built an empire with his voice, his vision, and his unapologetic will to dominate. He wore a tailored dark gray suit, crisp shirt, and no tie. His face was set in stone. His eyes scanned the building in front of him as if measuring it for demolition. Behind him, the doors of the other SUVs opened in perfect timing. Bianca Belair stepped onto the asphalt, her long braids swaying behind her like a whip. Seth Rollins adjusted his jacket and scanned the street. Riddle stood beside him, arms folded, expression uncharacteristically serious. Triple H emerged from the second row, followed by legal counsel, logistics, and on-site security. Then came the production team. Camera rigs were deployed, boom mics swung into position, microphones clipped, angles checked, uplinks established. They moved with military precision. Not a wasted second or motion. Every corner of the scene was being documented, streamed, and prepared for public broadcast. On a nearby rooftop, a drone lifted into the sky, capturing the bird's-eye view of a town about to be rewritten in history. Inside the station, Chief Harold Mallister squinted through the blinds of his office window and felt his throat tighten. He'd gotten the governor's call. Brief, curt, furious. He'd received 5 voicemails from state attorneys and 3 from D.C. federal liaison. The Department of Justice was now officially monitoring the situation. And outside, standing on the pavement with the calm of someone entirely in control, was Vince McMahon. Behind the station, reporters from national outlets began arriving. CNN, Fox, MSNBC, TMZ, even BBC America. They had gotten word, unofficial, anonymous. The WWE was staging a live response event to the arrest of one of their own. No one knew exactly what that meant, but everyone understood the stakes. The front door, the police station, opened with an audible groan. Garrett stepped out first, lips tight. His once bulging confidence deflated. He glanced at the crowd now forming across the street. Dozens turning into hundreds. He looked at the cameras, the lights, the boom. Mics, and then at Vince. "We didn't know who she was," Garrett said loud enough for only a few to hear. It was weak, empty. Vince didn't respond. He turned and looked at Bianca, gave a small nod. She walked toward the building, her shoulders square, eyes burning. Inside, Ronda sat on a metal bench in the Holden area, her wrists finally freed, but red with pressure marks. A cup of lukewarm water sat untouched beside her. She didn't fidget, didn't ask for updates. She waited. She had fought wars before. This wasn't new. Humiliation was a familiar battlefield. But what was coming next, that was something different. That was power on her terms. The door opened. Bianca appeared in the frame like a drawn sword. "Let's go," she said. Ronda stood. As she walked through the hallway, every officer she passed looked away. She didn't spare them a glance. Outside, the sun was beginning to dip low, casting gold across the town that had turned its back on her. When she stepped into the light, the crowd gasped, not at her injuries, which were minor, but at her presence. Even in silence, Ronda Rousey had gravity. She walked down the steps, flanked by Bianca and Triple H, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. Vince waited at the base, his hands clasped in front of him. The moment she reached him, he nodded once. "I'm sorry," he said. Ronda shook her head. "You came. That's what matters." The cameras caught it all. Vince turned toward the crowd. "This is not a PR stunt. This is not a performance. This is real, and it's not going away." Behind him, the mobile stage crew began constructing a platform. Screens were raised, speakers positioned. This wasn't going to be a press conference behind closed doors. It was going to be a public reckoning. Word spread quickly through town. More people arrived. Teachers, mechanics, grocery clerks, churchgoers. Many of them had seen their rest. Some had laughed. Some had looked away. Now they stood shoulder to shoulder in awkward silence as the infrastructure of justice by entertainment rose around them. On the courthouse lawn, WWE security set up barricades. Volunteers distributed bottled water. A banner was unfurled across the front of the stage. Justice is not a gimmick. As dusk bled into night, the lights came on. The show was about to begin. But no one was playing a character. The stage was ready by the time the first stars emerged overhead, sharp points of light piercing through the thick southern night. The air was still and swollen with expectation, the kind that turns towns into battlegrounds and crowds into witnesses. Mosswood had never seen so many people gathered in one place, not even for parades or homecomings. Now they stood packed shoulder to shoulder in the town square, their faces lit by the glow of camera rigs and giant LED screens being mounted with ruthless efficiency. From the rooftops, it looked like a concert. From the ground, it felt like Judgment Day. No one knew quite what they were about to witness. Rumors had exploded online that WWE was going to broadcast a special event live from Mosswood, that wrestlers would challenge the local police department to a match, that the governor would appear, that arrests were coming. Everyone had their own version of the truth. But they all knew one thing. Ronda Rousey was back in the open air, and something massive was coming. On the edge of the platform, Vince McMahon watched as his team ran final checks. The entire mobile production unit was up and humming, transmitting signals to satellites, phones, and news networks. The feed had been quietly offered to every major network. They could take it or leave it. Most took it. This wasn't about ratings. It was about visibility. And for the first time in a long time, Vince wasn't scripting anything. He wasn't feeding lines or building a fake rivalry. He was letting truth take the mic. And that made it the most dangerous show he'd ever produced. He looked out at the crowd. Some faces were skeptical, arms crossed, watching with narrowed eyes. Others were open, shaken, unsure of where they stood. A few carried signs. "We stand with Ronda. Justice over ego. She fought for us. Now we fight for her." In the back rows, teens on bikes leaned against fences, filming every second. The town had become a coliseum, and Ronda Rousey was walking towards the center of it. She moved through the narrow corridor between barricades, not flanked by security, but accompanied by her people. Bianca Belair to her right, Triple H to her left, the rest of the WWE roster lining the path like silent sentries. Their presence wasn't theatrical. It was protective, reverent. Ronda was dressed simply. Black jeans, a fitted long-sleeve shirt, no makeup, no title belts. But there was a new patch stitched into her sleeve. WWE Justice Division. No one had seen it before. No one had to ask what it meant. She climbed the steps to the stage and stood behind the podium. The microphones adjusted automatically. The lights softened to match the live feed. Behind her, the LED screen displayed nothing but her name and the date. For a few seconds, she said nothing. Then her voice cut through the air. Steady, unshaken, real. "My name is Ronda Rousey," she said. "I've stood in octagons. I've headlined arenas. I've worn medals and championship belts. I've been called a lot of things, some flattering, some cruel. But yesterday in Mosswood, I wasn't a fighter or a veteran or a champion. I wasn't even a person. I was just a problem to be handled. The crowd was quiet. Phones were raised like torches. I handed over valid ID. I explained who I was. I followed orders. I stayed calm. And I was thrown to the ground, handcuffed, and humiliated in front of strangers who didn't see a threat. They saw a woman who didn't belong. And they made a choice. She paused, letting the words breathe. I'm not here tonight for an apology. I'm not interested in another closed-door investigation with no consequences. I'm not looking for a settlement. I'm here because silence is no longer an option. I'm here because this isn't just about me. She looked out over the sea of faces. This is about every person who's been dismissed, doubted, degraded because of how they look, where they're from, or how they speak. It's about every teenager profiled on the street. Every woman called aggressive. Every black man asked to step out of the vehicle for no reason. Every veteran told their line when they say who they are. It's about all of them, and it's about us. The LED screen behind her changed, showing brief clips of other incidents. Dash cam footage, body cam clips, grainy cell phone videos, not dramatized, real, painful. A boy on the ground crying, a woman slammed against a patrol car. A man repeating, I can't breathe. One more time than he should have needed to. Rhonda's voice never wavered. We've seen these videos. We shake our heads. We move on. But not tonight. Tonight, this town became a stage, and we're not leaving until the spotlight stays on. Behind her, Bianca stepped forward and handed her a sheet of paper. This is a formal demand, Rhonda continued, co-signed by our legal counsel, and now entered into public record. We are requesting a federal civil rights investigation into the Mosswood Police Department. We are filing suit on behalf of every citizen mistreated, every voice silenced, every complaint buried. This is the beginning of an avalanche, and it starts here. The crowd shifted. Some cheered, some whispered. On the edges, local officers stared grimly, powerless to control the narrative they'd once owned. We're also announcing the launch of the WWE Justice Initiative, Rhonda said. A legal and media arm dedicated to exposing abuses of power and protecting those who can't protect themselves. Funded by us, run by us, backed by the biggest media platform in the world. She took one final breath. You thought I was alone. You thought I was powerless. You were wrong. She stepped back, and Vince McMahon stepped forward. There was no introduction. No dramatics. He stood like a man carved from granite, eyes sweeping the crowd before he spoke. You don't get to hurt people like her, he said. Not without the whole world showing up at your door. He paused. And when we show up, we don't knock. The applause started small, scattered, hesitant. Then it grew louder, stronger, rolling through the square like thunder across dry land. In the chaos of sound, Garrett tried to slip away, but a line of WWE security moved subtly into position, forming a wall that blocked the alley behind the station. He didn't try again. The show ended not with a closing number or a catchphrase, but with a hard cut to black and the words, "This is just the beginning." As the crowd dispersed, still stunned, still buzzing, people began to speak to each other in ways they hadn't before. A teenage girl hugged her mother. A teacher shook hands with a student she had once suspected without cause. Two elderly men stood side by side and said nothing because they were listening now. On the far edge of the square, Rhonda sat alone on a crate near the production trucks, unwrapping her taped wrists. Bianca found her there and handed her a bottle of water. You okay? She asked. Rhonda nodded. I will be. The night sky hung heavy above them, filled with silent stars and 1,000 unanswered questions. But something had shifted, not just in Mosswood. In the current, in the story, in the balance between power and voice, and Ronda Rousey had tipped it. Dawn came slowly to Mosswood, dragging its pale light across cracked sidewalks and shuttered windows, as if hesitant to expose what had changed. The air, once stagnant and thick with indifference, now carried something brittle and charged. A stillness that wasn't peace, a quiet that felt like aftermath. The square, where hundreds had gathered just hours earlier, now stood eerily empty, save for the remnants of cables, barricades, and paper cups blown against the curbs. The massive LED screen had been dismantled, the stage stripped to its bones, but the message had already carved itself into the town's identity, like initials into wet concrete. Ronda Rousey's words were no longer just sound. They were artifact, memory, proof, and Mosswood, whether it wanted to or not, had become a symbol. The first headlines hit national broadcasts before the sun had fully risen. WWE wrestlers lead real-life protest against police abuse. Ronda Rousey speaks out in viral live broadcast, calls for civil rights investigation. Mosswood under federal review after live reckoning draws global attention. The footage had gone global, translated, subtitled, debated. Civil rights leaders praised the bravery. Critics scrambled to downplay the spectacle. Conservative commentators called it manufactured outrage. Liberal ones called it historic. Social media had already split into factions, as it always did. But one phrase trended higher than any counterargument. She wasn't alone. By noon, the Department of Justice released a statement confirming that an official inquiry had been opened into the Mosswood Police Department, citing multiple prior complaints and recent events of public concern. The town council issued a lukewarm apology, attempting to distance themselves from the individual officers while assuring citizens that Mosswood welcomes all voices. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close. Garrett and Brinson, whose names had now been repeated across every major network, were placed on immediate leave. But former citizens began to come forward. A woman from Baton Rouge recounted being pulled over outside town 5 years earlier and forced to sit on the roadside for an hour while her children cried in the back seat. A former high school teacher shared a story of racial profiling and retaliation after calling out misconduct. One by one, voices rose. The illusion of quiet was gone. Meanwhile, in Stamford, the WWE headquarters buzzed like a war room. The Justice Division, hastily formed in the weeks prior, now had a proper floor in the executive tower. Staffed with legal analysts, social media strategists, veteran advocates, and outreach coordinators, the department was growing faster than any brand Vince had launched in a decade. He stood in the center of it now, arms folded, watching as Ronda reviewed a stack of emails, victims, allies, families, offers of support, demands for help. Some had nothing but stories. Some had evidence. Some just wanted to be seen. "You sure you're up for this?" he asked her. Ronda looked up, tired but resolute. "They showed up for me," she said. "Now we show up for them." She had barely slept since the broadcast. The adrenaline had faded, leaving a raw edge of fatigue that clung to her like sweat. But she refused to step back. This wasn't a moment. It was a movement, and she wasn't going to let it die in the news cycle. She met with attorneys. She fielded calls from senators, veterans groups, grassroots organizers. She sat down for 2 interviews, one with 60 Minutes, the other with an independent journalist she trusted more than any mainstream outlet. In both, she didn't recite talking points. She told the story exactly as it had happened. The humiliation, the restraint, the rage that simmered beneath stillness, the choice to endure it, not because she was weak, but because she was calculating the weight of every action. And she told them what came next. The WWE Justice Initiative wasn't just a campaign. It was a machine with funding, reach, and influence, with people willing to walk into city council meetings and shine lights into the corners that never expected to be seen. With cameras and legal teams, and a reputation for never backing down, within a week, the team had opened investigations into 3 more towns, each with buried complaints, underfunded lawsuits, and decades of silence. WWE began streaming Justice Files, a raw documentary-style series highlighting real people facing real systemic abuse. Ronda narrated each episode herself. No makeup, no flair, just truth. In Mosswood, change came fast and hard. The police department was placed under federal oversight. An independent commission replaced the local review board. The mayor, who had been conveniently absent during the entire confrontation, resigned. Paula Wiggins, the gas station clerk whose call had started everything, quit her job after her face appeared on 1,000 screens. She claimed harassment, fear, unfair targeting, but no one was buying it. Outside the rebuilt town square, a mural appeared. Ronda's face stylized in bold reds and blacks with the words, "Not silent, not alone." Locals took photos beside it, some with pride, some with shame, all of them with recognition. One morning, weeks later, Ronda returned to the town alone. No cameras, no fanfare, just her in the early sun as she walked the length of Main Street with her hands in her jacket pockets and her hair tied back. Some people looked up as she passed. A few nodded. One man thanked her. She visited the mural, stood before it in silence, then walked on. At the edge of town, she stopped at the gas station. Kelly's Fuel and Food had new signage, fresh paint. A different woman stood behind the counter. When Ronda stepped inside, The woman's eyes widened, but she didn't flinch. "I saw you speak," she said quietly. "It mattered." Rhonda gave her a small nod. "Thanks." She bought a bottle of water, nothing more, and then left. Back at WWE headquarters, a conference room had been converted into the Justice Studio. Maps covered one wall, pins, threads, color-coded flags. At the center, a digital screen displayed live updates from field teams, cities marked for upcoming investigations, updates on ongoing litigation, reports from anonymous whistleblowers. Rhonda stood before the screen, arms crossed. "Where's next?" she asked. A young analyst scrolled through a list. "East Texas. Small town. Black family says their son was expelled after reporting abuse. The principal's brother is the sheriff." Rhonda nodded once. "Send the team. I'll follow in 2 days." She turned, grabbed her backpack, and headed for the door. Vince watched her go from down the hall. He didn't stop her. He knew better. He returned to his office and sat at his desk where a new placard rested beside the WWE logo. WWE Justice Division, founded in response, built for retaliation. He smiled just a little. The world hadn't changed overnight, but it had tilted just a degree, just enough. Because someone refused to stay quiet, and because when she called, an empire answered. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out the next video, and don't forget to share this one with someone who needs to see it.